Welcome to today's Community Cast. My name is Matt Morgan. I'm the pastor at Community Brookside, a new church plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We are so blessed by your presence, and we hope that today's content will bring you joy. So, I don't know if you would believe me when I say this or not, but I believe that there's a lot to somebody's name. I'm not sure if you agree with that or not, because some people are I feel like some people are named kind of frivolously, but a lot of times someone's name really can describe who they are. And this happens a lot, especially I think in the scriptures. When we see somebody who has a name, that name usually has a meaning. And for many of our ancestors, that meaning kind of played a role in their everyday lives. The names that were chosen for some people in our history and some people in our Bible, they were chosen because they had defining characteristics that made the person who had that name who they were. Do you know what your name means? If you don't, I encourage you to go look it up, because I think that names really do get to play a role in who you are. So if you don't know what your name means, I encourage you, go look it up. Do you know the story of why you're named what you're named? Are you named after a cousin? Are you named after an uncle or a great-grandfather? Are you named after a Civil War hero? Are you named after, a biblical character? You should know the story of why you're named what you are. So I want to tell you a story about how we chose the names that we did for our children. Some of you might have heard part of this in a previous sermon that I've done. But when we were pregnant with our firstborn, we really struggled what we were going to name our sweet little girl. So I love the name Avery because I think it's just a beautiful name, and I still believe that to this day. But Nicole really liked the name Alyssa. So we knew that we wanted our kids to have at least a part of our names in their name. And so we had already decided that they would have our middle names as theirs. So as you can tell in our relationship, Nicole fully wears the pants. And so we decided that Alyssa would, and by we, I mean she decided, and I said, yes, dear, that Alyssa would be her name. And her name really suits her. So the word Alyssa, the name Alyssa, means graceful and noble. Now, I've never seen a girl that fits her name more perfectly than Alyssa does. Because when she was a little tiny baby, what she would do is she would fall asleep in her car seat, and she would just sit there with her legs crossed, and she would have her hands folded in her lap, and just would be the most beautiful, graceful. I can't even describe it to you, but her name really fit her. She was graceful, and she was noble. And now, even as an 11-year-old, I've never seen someone who does ballet as beautifully as she does. She makes me very proud. This is Alyssa. She's graceful. She's noble. That's her name, and her name fits her perfectly. Now, my son Levi, we've talked about before, but some of you may have missed it, so I wanted to kind of recap. I wanted my son's name to be Tristan. I've always wanted my son's name to be Tristan. But Nicole, when she was younger, knew a little boy who was a brother of one of her good friends, and his name was Tristan, and she says he was not super awesome to her, and so she was not a fan of that name. Nicole didn't want to be reminded of this other person every time she said our son's name. So again, I lost the battle over the name Tristan, and our son's name is Levi. But the great thing is we had some discussion about Levi before we decided to name him. So in the New Testament, we see the name Levi used as a name for one of Jesus' disciples. That disciple is also known as Matthew. Where Levi is the Hebrew version of that name, Matthew is the Greek version of that same name. So the irony is that because Levi has both Levi as his first name and Scott as his middle name, he's basically, to some extent, a little miniature me. He's a junior, sort of. He's the Hebrew junior of my Greek senior. So it's kind of a fun story. Names are super important, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I think my children's names fit them exactly the way it should be. And think about this. So naming things involves a price, right? For you to earn the ability to name something, it involves you probably paying some sort of a price. For us, when we named our children, it was 9 months of pregnancy. So that means vomiting and sweating and late nights of tossing and turning and painful childbirth and waiting and being, sitting around in anticipation for what our children will look like. It was a pretty high cost for us to pay, but it was worth it. So now think about what it involves when you name something that lasts longer than just your average lifetime, right? Like a building or a park or a monument or even a stadium. Do you know what the name of the stadium is where the Dallas Cowboys play? It's in Texas. What's its name? It's the AT&T Stadium. So did you know that AT&T pays between $17 and $19 million a year to keep their name on that stadium? It's a high price for AT&T, but they've decided that the naming rights to that stadium are worth it for them. Now you know where your overages go, so you're welcome for that. But names are important. In Genesis chapter 25, we get introduced to a man named Jacob, whose name means grabber or supplanter. And his brother, whose name is Esau, it's a little bit simpler name, it means hairy. In this story, we get to see the development of these two brothers. Their personalities kind of get to grow, and we get a glimpse into the future of their relationship as well through this story. We also get to see how God reaches into these lives and takes someone's name, takes their identity, and can totally shift it to something else. So let's read together in Genesis chapter 25, verses 19 through 34. It'll be on your screen. You can follow along. And this is what it says for us today. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son, Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled with each other in her womb, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. And after this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he is also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is a birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So we can see from the very beginning of the story that Jacob is a bit of a trickster, right? Even the word that God gives to Rebekah about the children in her womb, that the younger is going to rule over the older, which is not norm for that society, right? The normal way was that families worked together for inheritance. It was based on your rank as a child. So the firstborn would be the person who would be given the birthright, which we just heard that in Esau's case, he sold away for a bowl of stew. So what does that mean to have the birthright, right? So the birthright means, it's a word that denotes the special privileges or advantages belonging to the firstborn son among the Jews. So this person usually became the priest of the family. The firstborn son had allotted to him also a double portion of the paternal inheritance. The firstborn inherited the judicial authority of his father. So whatever that might be, whatever rules and decisions that your father would be able to make, the firstborn would get that authority as well. The Jews attached a sacred importance to the rank of firstborn and first begotten. If we think about Jesus, he is the first begotten of God, right? There's a special significance when we talk about Jesus being the firstborn of God. As a firstborn, He has an inheritance superior to his brethren and is alone the true priest. A birthright is super important to a family back in the ancient times in our biblical context. And it's a lot to give up just for a bowl of soup, right? And I really think Esau was being a bit dramatic when he was saying, look, I'm about to die. Have you ever had like your kids say something like that to you and you just kind of roll your eyes? That's my life. Every day, my daughter and my son go through the refrigerator and they just eat because they're children and they're growing and they should be doing that. But every day, they're just so famished they might die. It's a good thing we have snacks. So here we see Jacob in this moment of true hunger. Esau's starving literally to death in his own mind. And so Jacob takes this opportunity to trick his older brother. And in this moment, Jacob becomes the supplanter of his brother Esau. So the word Jacob, again, it means supplanter or one who will supersede or replace. It means someone or something who wrongfully takes the place of another. Jacob tricks his brother into giving away the right to make decisions for the family. Jacob also is going to be getting a double portion of the inheritance, and Esau will not anymore. He'll also be able to be the judge for any decisions that need to be made for the family. And that's a lot of responsibility to give to one man who we know now is proving to be a bit of a trickster. And in Genesis chapter 27, the story gets even richer. So let's follow along in 27, verses 1 through 17. It'll be on your screen. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver, and your bow. Go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now, Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.' Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches him? I would appear to be tricking him and bring down a curse on on myself rather than a blessing. His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." So he went and he got them and he brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. In this moment, Jacob and Rebekah conspire together to trick Isaac into blessing him instead of Esau. It's a kind of strange thing to see in this time, a mother actually helping her son trick her husband. That's not really something that you would see. In this part of Jacob's story, he is not the one seeking out the blessing on his own. He's actually having his mother encourage him to go and become the trickster. She's encouraging him to play into what his name means, the supplanter or the grabber. When you think about it, what are some of the most major things that families fight over? Just think about that for a second. Some of the things that come to my mind are, number one, I think that families fight over differing political views. I've seen that play out in my own family. I think families sometimes fight over who makes the best desserts. Like there's always conversation about, apple pie around Thanksgiving. It's become quite a contested title to have around our house. And mainly, I think the thing that families fight over the most is inheritance. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen families break apart when it comes to inheritance issues. When property isn't dispersed in a way that everybody thinks is equitable and fair, families begin to fight and complain. Sometimes families sadly stop speaking to one another. Brothers and sisters stop calling and stop visiting. Cousins are no longer allowed to play together. Birthday parties are skipped. Feelings are hurt. So in this story, we see Rebekah driving a wedge between Jacob and Esau. We begin to see the blessing of the father prepared to be given to the wrong son. So while Jacob, his name might mean supplanter in this story, in this case, his mother encouraged this behavior. Rebekah pushed Jacob into a scheme to be the man who would receive the traditional blessing from Isaac and replace her older son as the true head of the family once Isaac is gone. So Isaac gives the blessing to Jacob instead of Esau. And we pick up in the story in Genesis chapter 27 and verse 30, so you can follow along here. And here's where it says, after Isaac had finished blessing him and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry, and he said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he's taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. What can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Then Esau wept aloud. His father Isaac answered him, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw off his yoke from your neck." Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. When your brother is no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him, I'll send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" So Jacob did what his mother says, and he packed up everything he had, and he left to go to Haran to flee from his brother's wrath. This trickster, this supplanter, he had to run for his life because of the decisions that he made. His decision to steal the blessing from his older brother has kind of woken the anger inside of Esau and reminded him now that he's been tricked 2 different times by Jacob. And Jacob's only choice is to run. And at this point in Jacob's story, his name and his identity are spot on, right? He's a supplanter. He's now successfully taken the highest seat in his family. But the irony here is that Jacob will soon get a taste of his own medicine. He's going to learn his lesson. On his way to Haran, Jacob comes across a beautiful young woman named Rachel, who just happened to be the daughter of his uncle Laban, who he's running to go and meet. When he sees Rachel, he falls in love. And when he finally arrives with Rachel in Haran, his uncle Laban met him joyfully and he celebrated his arrival. It says that he hugged Jacob and he kissed him. And it says that Jacob stayed with his uncle Laban for a month. Now, while Jacob stayed with his uncle, he helped with herding and taking care of Laban's animals. So one night, Laban looked over at his nephew Jacob and he said, "Hey, just because you're my relative, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't pay you a wage for what you're doing when you're working for me. What would you like to be your wages?" Jacob said, "I want to marry Rachel." And they struck up a deal so that Jacob could marry Rachel after he worked for his father-in-law for 7 years. Now, that's got to be true love like I've never seen, right? So I don't know how many of you husbands out there had to work for your fathers-in-law for 7 years to earn the right to marry his daughter, but I imagine there aren't too many men who would be willing to go that far. At this point in the story, though, I have to kind of give you an introduction to another character that gets thrown in. Her name is Leah. Leah is Laban's oldest daughter and sister to Rachel. And the Bible really doesn't do any justice to Leah at all. So the name Leah means cow, while the name Rachel means ewe. Not you like you as a person, it means ewe like a lamb, like a female sheep. The Bible also describes Leah as having weak eyes, which pretty much means that she was hideous. So the Bible paints this really kind of tragic picture of Leah when she is a not attractive cow, and Rachel we see is a beautiful ewe, right? What do you think of when you think of a ewe? A beautiful white, woolen sheep and a cow rolling around in mud and chewing grass. Like there's a whole different picture there. But it shows a tremendous difference in appearances between Leah and Rachel. So let's pick up on the details as we're preparing for Jacob's wedding. This comes from Genesis chapter 29, verses 14 through 30. It says, after Jacob stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, just because you're my relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served him 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Aw, it's really mushy. Verse 21 goes on, then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is completed and I want to make love to her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her, and Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah, and I think that's really funny how the scripture puts it. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Laban replied, it's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to her also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. In this moment, Jacob kind of gets a taste of his own medicine. He's definitely been tricked. He's been duped into marrying a woman he didn't even want to marry. His trickery has come back and found him. What a sneaky trick. So think about it this way. How would you feel if you woke up in the morning after your wedding night, and I imagine the wedding was very interesting for him not to recognize until the next morning that his wife was totally somebody else. But what would that look like if you woke up and found somebody else next to you in bed that you didn't expect, that you thought you were marrying somebody completely different? You would be befuddled, right? And I did say befuddled. Jacob immediately gets up and he runs to find Laban. And when he challenges Laban, what does Laban say? Well, it's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. What a load of junk, right? You think there would be some sort of like a breach of contract here, some way that you could nullify this agreement that they had had? And in that moment, Jacob, I think, begins to start learning his lesson. He's probably like, so this is what it feels like to be on the receiving end of being tricked. Oftentimes, the things that we are known for will be our undoing. In her book of poems and quotes called Making Wishes, Rochelle E. Goodrich says, lies don't fit snugly into disguises. Eventually the cloak falls off and you're left staring at the naked truth, which is always an uncomfortable situation. In this situation, the naked truth has revealed a cow instead of a lamb. Jacob's trickery of Esau has come home to roost, as the old saying goes. Jacob has gotten his first taste of being tricked, and I don't think he likes it. As a result of Laban's trickery, Jacob has to live with his prize forever. Lesson learned, right? Maybe, maybe not. In this moment, God begins to do something inside of Jacob that we will talk more about next week. But for now, I want to leave you with this. You are more than you've been known for. Each of us has a reputation, right? Each of us has nicknames that our friends call us. Each of us has ways that our friends know us. And oftentimes throughout our lives, we grow and we change. And sometimes our identities no longer fit the person we are now. Sometimes in our lives, we've been known as the bully, the jock, the show-off, the ladies' man, the drug addict, the black sheep. Sometimes we have been known by how we've behaved rather than by the name that we should all be called by, the name Christian. Today, I want to encourage you to come back to us next week, to watch the sermon that we do next week, and see how Jacob's identity will be changed with the help of God through redemption. And I want you to know that you too have that same hope of redemption and a new identity for your life as well. You could never go too far away from God where he can't reach you and change you. You're more than a label. You're more than the names you might be called. You're more than the reputation that you were in high school. You're a child of the Most High, and don't settle for anything less than that. Your identity is important, and it's even more important when you realize that your identity is wrapped up in Jesus. I want to remind you that when we have Jesus as the center of our lives, the way we act, the way we love, the way we treat one another should represent who Jesus is. So this morning, I recognize in the world there are times where we don't often look like the Jesus we say we serve. So I want to remind you in this time to be the person that God has called you to be, to set your old identity aside and become the Christian that God is calling you to be today. And for some of you, it's not going to be that big of an adjustment. But for some of you, like me, that might take some hard decisions, might take some change. Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about how God uses some normal people to do incredible things. And next week, we're going to see how the identity of Jacob changes and how the Hebrew people will change their whole identity as a result of Jacob's life. Friends, sometimes in order for us to make an impact on those around us, that impact has to begin with us. So my prayer for you this week and my challenge for you this week is make your identity, the way that people know you, make that identity match up with the identity that you were given at your baptism. A child of the Most High. And I know that's hard, but that's why we have church, so that we can lift each other up and build each other up and pray for one another. I pray that this church can be that place for you. Thank you so much for joining us on today's Community Cast. We hope that you were blessed by today's conversation. If you'd like to know more about Community Brookside, please feel free to visit us at our website, communitybrookside.com, or find us on your favorite social media outlet. We hope to hear from you soon. Be blessed.